Eugenics started it, and a cult of death keeps it going. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is another declaration of truth from your host, Terry A. Hurlbut. Eugenics, artificial selection of human beings to eliminate deleterious characteristics, is almost as old as civilization. Plato toyed with the concept, though he did not give it that name, over half a century before Alexander the Great conquered his way across the Far East. Or the Middle East, actually. But eugenics didn't really get its start until the publications of the seminal works of two men of science, Charles Darwin and Gregor Mendel. Now, those two couldn't have had more opposite worldviews, but Darwin's followers turned Mendel's work into a rationale for discrimination. Worse still, a certain woman used it as a rationale for wiping out large groups of people by attrition. She did this by encouraging them to stop their own children from being born, by contraception and, well, you know by what other method. The American left still regards her as a heroine for women's rights. They focus only on the contraception and, for lack of a better term, pregnancy management angle, not on the true reasons that woman had for promoting these things. Who was that woman? By what name do we recognize the organization she founded? Before I answer, I want to shout out to the prime sponsor of this channel, which is Conservative News and Views. Link in the description. Be sure to check out the awesome CNAV Store. Scroll down near the bottom for that link. Lots of great merchandise there, especially this t-shirt that I have chosen for today, which depicts, however diagrammatically, a child in the womb. And with this caption, "Not your body, not your choice." One more thing. If you like what you're about to hear, you can like this video. You can also click the bell icon every time to get a notice every time I come out with a new one. In fact, do you see the new icon, the heart shape with the US dollar sign in it? That's the super thanks icon. If you really want to keep these videos coming, click that and leave me a tip. Any currency will do, so long as it's legal tender. Now, first, in case any of you out there are still scratching your heads and asking, you what? Eugenics comes from the Greek prefix eu, meaning good, and the word genesis, meaning a beginning. So eugenics is supposed to be about good beginnings. The premise of eugenics is brutally simple. Now that civilization has removed the usual pressures of natural selection, make that wild selection, enlightened leaders must apply artificial selection to make sure the human species continues to improve. Germany's National Socialists tried to apply this idea practically with genetic or at least ancestry tests for applicants to key services and the direct arrangement of, if not exactly marriage, certainly of coupling. The National Socialists called their program Lebensborn, literally, fountain of life. And now I'm going to tell you who that woman was, Margaret Sanger. She likely knew that no such program as Lebensborn could ever succeed in the United States. So she chose a much more crude method, persuade populations she regarded as inferior to extinguish themselves by attrition. She founded the Birth Control Federation of America, which now calls itself the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, and from the beginning she sought to hide the true purpose of her program. Obviously, if word got out, that program would fail. Most people who hear anything about Margaret Sanger associate her only with contraception as a matter of women's convenience. To hear the real reason she popularized contraception and sought to make it selectively available would come as a shock. So great a shock would it be that her biographers deny that such was her intent or purpose. And if you want an example, just look her up in the Encyclopedia Britannica, as I did to prepare for this show. 2 nights ago, Twitter journalist Dom Luker, the breaker of narratives himself, dropped a thread intending to reveal the truth. After that, none can deny the connection of contraception to eugenics. Dom Luker's thread runs to 21 tweets. As usual, it starts with an ironic heading to get attention, but this time his thread header speaks directly to an accusation against conservatives that he likely regards as not only spurious, but more properly applicable to their enemies. I've left links in the description to the odd numbers, and in this case, I wanted to make sure to link to the anchor tweet, the one that says, read the full conversation on Twitter. If you're going to retweet or quote any kind of thread, always choose the anchor tweet. That way, the user gets the thread. And one more thing. I'm going to take some liberties here to splice in some text that appears as an image or as spoken lines in a video or especially out of order. Without further ado, here goes. Thread. Proof that Republicans should support pro-choice and why black people should end more pregnancies. Well, again, not really. That's clickbait, as someone noticed after reading it. More on that later. Now, we get to the real meat. On December 10th, 1939, Planned Parenthood's founder, Margaret Sanger, wrote a letter to Dr. C.J. Gamble. By the way, Dr. Gamble was one of those Gambles, as in Procter and. More on that below. This quote is most telling. Quote, we do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. So this minister is the man who can straighten that idea for rebellious members. Unquote, Margaret Sanger. Now, ask yourselves, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot does she mean by rebellious members? Moving on. Sanger believed that she had found the solution to Stoddard's crisis of the ages in birth control. In a 1919 article, she appealed to eugenicists to lend their support to birth control as the vehicle for racial betterment. Sanger founded the American Birth Control League, or ABCL for short, in 1921 with Clarence Cook C.C. Little, president of the American Eugenics Society, and Lothrop Stoddard, a white supremacist who authored The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy. In 1920, the ABCL would eventually become the Birth Control Federation of America, which was renamed Planned Parenthood Federation of America in 1942. Sanger's plan was to eliminate the unfit while striving to create a race of thoroughbreds, which was the tagline for her magazine, the Birth Control Review. Thoroughbreds, she says. Now there's the biggest objection to eugenics. It objectifies all human beings and treats us all like animals. Well, let's go on. Sanger published countless articles on eugenics and racial cleansing in the birth control book. Margaret Sanger launched the Negro Project, her term, not mine, in 1939 to educate blacks about birth control and as a result cut the birth rate among black Americans. Clarence Gamble, the heir to the Procter & Gamble Company, offered his assistance to her. Gamble had previously funded North Carolina birth control clinics in order to better North Carolina's future generation by rectifying the current unsatisfactory differential birth rate. Excuse me? Gamble was also an avid supporter of eugenic population control. Sanger's publications give rise to the notion that she would wish to destroy the Negro population. Quote, between 1929 and 1974, more than 7,600 North Carolinians were sterilized. Unquote, the Winston-Salem Journal, which wrote extensively on this tragedy. Many of them, they say, against their will. In the case of Box versus Planned Parenthood of Indiana and Kentucky Incorporated, Justice Clarence Thomas used the occasion of his concurring opinion to reveal how pregnancy ending is a furthering of the eugenics goal of Planned Parenthood's founder, Margaret Sanger. Frederick Jaffe founded what would become the Guttmacher Institute in 1968, after having served as a Planned Parenthood director and vice president. Jaffe offered the now infamous memo bearing his name to Population Council President Bernard Berelson. The tweet continues with an image of the Jaffe memo. Planned Parenthood continues to issue the Margaret Sanger Award to this day and reveres Sanger's visionary accomplishments, including the Negro Project. Now, this tweet continues with a document labeled Planned Parenthood Federation of America Incorporated Opposition Claims about Margaret, which means, of course, that it has a sanitized history. Margaret Sanger labeled people whose populations face gradual reduction, eradication, and final extinction with a range of derogatory terms. The unsuitable, human weeds, the feeble-minded, incompetent masses, and the faulty were among her favorites. The tweet continues with a video by Nick Cannon appearing on an outlet called VLAD TV, saying all this up front in a tone not of celebration by any means, but of warning. While Sanger did not use these terms exclusively to refer to black Americans, her writings on racial cleansing and her affiliations with open racists and eugenicists show that race was a major motivator in her eugenic fervor. In 1957, Mike Wallace interviewed Sanger, where she said, and I quote, "I think the biggest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be human beings, practically delinquents, prisoners, all," I couldn't make that up, that word, "just marked when they're born," unquote, Margaret Sanger. Researchers determined the extent to which Planned Parenthood placed its facilities in black communities. They included the zip codes of all Planned Parenthood facilities in their study, rather than taking a sample in order to avoid selection bias. They found, and you can read what's on an embedded image of text, that Planned Parenthood definitely did place most of their clinics in black neighborhoods. Now, you have to ask why. Moving on. Bill Gates is one of population control's strongest supporters. His father, William Gates Sr., was head of Planned Parenthood when Bill Gates, that we know, was a child. This was verified in a 2003 interview with PBS Bill Moyers, which was scrubbed from the internet. So is it wrong to ask why? Organ harvesting is a very lucrative business, and it is intensified when you consider melaninated organs, which are priced higher than organs with a lower count of melanin. Now why that should be, even I, with my scientific background, have no idea. But I have verified that melanin as a chemical is worth 10 times its weight in gold. Moving on. Melanin currently costs more than gold, silver, platinum, palladium, rhodium, and coltan combined. There have been countless black celebrities that address this growing problem, but it appears that they have yet to connect it all with Planned Parenthood. The liberal media promotes propaganda to push you away from the truth right before you reach it. An undercover interview with Dr. Deborah Nucatola, the Senior Director of Medical Services for Planned Parenthood Federation of America, confirmed these allegations. She says, quote, "They just want to do it in a way that is not perceived. This clinic is making money off of this," unquote, Deborah Nucatola. Other videos have leaked to the public that display the lack of compassion and care that some of these fetuses deserve. Now, Luker embeds one example, and I must warn you, do not click through to that video if you have a queasy stomach. In fact, I would say it rates a disclaimer that I remember from the last century. Parental judgment and discretion are advised. Naturally, Luker asks, how many mothers would go through with ending their pregnancy if they were required to watch this video along with the others prior to, well, going through with it? This is political and cultural. Democrats support Sanger and release Planned Parenthood in their cities. We have more black kids being ended in the womb than born in New York every year alone. If this continues, there will be no black lives to matter tomorrow if our babies don't matter today. End of thread. What a powerful ending that was. Before I go on to describe where some of these images came from and the reactions to it, I want to shout out to a sponsor who can really help you through the economic storms to come. That sponsor is oursilverlines.com. Do you feel like you're working harder for your money just to get by? You are not alone. The fluctuating economy, employment issues, and unexpected changes in life have left many families struggling over the past few years. Collecting gold and silver can help shield you against many of these challenges. But if you're like me many years ago, you don't know where or how to start. Our Silver Lines helps by connecting you with thousands of members who are learning the secrets to creating and protecting true wealth by collecting precious metals. Whether you just want to collect rare and unique coins or take advantage of the business opportunities this company provides, either way, they can help you learn to live an exceptional life. Visit oursilverlines.com to learn how you can build a legacy for your future. Now, most of the images and videos in those tweets from that thread come from collections, the curators of which are sympathetic to Margaret Sanger's memory. What those curators would say, were anyone to confront them with the full implications of Sanger's words, I can't imagine. Perhaps I should know that some people can really be brazen or just plain careless, but I'll tell you something. These people, the curators of some of these images, amaze me. If they had the slightest idea of just how sensitive those documents are, they would require you to log in before viewing them, which means view them now while you still can. Now, about Mike Wallace' 1957 interview with Sanger. He had asked her whether she believed in the concept sin. What she said about the biggest sin in the world, she said in answer to that question. Wallace then tried to get her back on the track of sin in the ordinary sense, and she refused to answer. No doubt Mike Wallace expected her to answer exclusively that no such thing as sexual sin exists, and that facilitation of fornication or adultery was a noble aim. Was he prepared to hear her say that some children are better off never having been born? No one knows, because no one ever asked him. 2 hours after he finished the thread, Dom Luker added another tweet, to which I've left a link in the description, saying two things. First, he apologized for including the video, the one I put the disclaimer on about parental judgment and discretion. In the end, he did it to wake people up. He also left that technical note about what happens when you retweet a tweet in the middle of a thread. If you do that, you don't get the thread. So if you want to share the thread, retweet the anchor tweet. Most people treated the thread favorably, and some got the point at once. I have links in the description to 10 tweets altogether in reaction. Now, so here's a sample of them. Sample. Listen to this. But I thought pro-life was white supremacy, like good grammar and showing up to work on time. Yes, believe it or not, you have people saying that good English grammar, syntax, and above all, diction is racist. And so is punctuality at work or school. But the point this user was making is that the phrase white world supremacy appeared in a quote by people promoting the encouragement of non-whites to curtail their procreation. Another user made that very point. If conservatives really were racist, they would encourage this kind of thing. The point is, we don't. In reply, someone else said the Democrats turned the tables, as he put it, in the 1930s and have kept up the false appearance for nearly a century. Someone else shared a video in which Tucker Carlson interviewed Candace Owens about this very subject, the impact of each access to pregnancy-ending services on America's black population. Yet another user pointed out that 60% of mothers who have their pregnancies ended happen to be black. And this, the pregnancy ending industry began with catering to blacks, and now it is a much broader industry. Several of the other tweets pointed out that most people simply do not know either the history or what goes on in certain places. Two users commented on the ironic nature of the anchor tweet, which again is typical of Dom Luker's threads. Remember, he doesn't mean what he says in the anchor tweet. That's only to get your attention. And if he gets a leftist attention, then maybe he can teach something to someone who really needs to learn it. And now, my analysis. I first read about Margaret Sanger in a history textbook. That textbook was The National Experience, A History of the United States, 3rd edition, by Blum, Morgan, Rose, Schlesinger, Stamp, and Woodward, published by Harcourt Brace Jovanovich, 1973. Those 6 hoity-toities, 3 of whom taught and did their research at Yale while I attended there, described Sanger typically as a heroine of women's rights, showing women how to avoid problem pregnancies. Lay aside for a moment the over-sexualization of modern human beings, adult, adolescent, and young child alike. Those 6 professors failed to mention Sanger's scientific racism. That racism derived from her embrace of eugenics and her decision that all members of a certain group were genetically inferior to members of the dominant group. But of course they failed to mention that, after all, the United States led a multinational alliance to overthrow a megalomaniac whose own eugenics notions informed his actions. The cost in blood, tears, and treasure took a long time to recover from, and some of it we might never recover. Now, do you think those guys are going to admit that the greatest heroine and liberatrix of women shared that man's ideology? No way, Jose. Or maybe that should be no way, Josefina. But perhaps people forget Sanger's embrace of eugenics because today, eugenics does not seem to drive the movement for keeping pregnancy ending legal the way it once did. This despite research showing that Planned Parenthood sets up shop in black neighborhoods more often than in any other kind of neighborhood. You don't hear about eugenics anymore, and certainly not from Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, or any of those other guys. Instead, you hear the society has too many mouths to feed, or that humans are a blight on the planet. Thus, a pure cult of death has replaced the eugenics movement, and society has even less excuse for tolerating it. Links to the description of the article, to the thread, to Dom Luker's additional request, to the 10 tweets in reaction, to my Declarations of Truth Twitter account, and to Conservative News and Views. I've also left links to the awesome CNAV Store and to oursilverlines.com, as I also mentioned. You know already about how to like a video, turn on notifications, and leave a tip. On the end screen, I'm going to leave a subscribe link to my channel and links to my Christian governance playlist, one of several videos I made when Dobbs versus Jackson Women's came down, and the video of Candace Owens' interview with Tucker Carlson. This is Terry A. Hurlbut delivering another declaration of truth and reminding you to let the truth set you free.